Matt sat across from me in the kitchen, casting a sly smile that always left me feeling a mix of puzzlement and caution. This man had a knack for coming up with schemes that never failed to pull me out of my comfort zone. And here he was again, giving me that look, the look of a mischief maker, brewing something grand yet not entirely explainable. Sky, we need to get out of the city and spend some time away from all this noise. He began, as if it were something as simple as suggesting a walk in the park. My grandfather left me an estate, the one on the hill. I think we could totally disconnect from civilization there. It'll be exhilarating. I frowned, looking at his excited face. The estate on the hill he was talking about had been abandoned long ago, and to put it mildly, was more eerie than romantic. Too far away, too secluded, and who knows what condition it was in. I voiced all these concerns to Matt, but he just laughed. "You have no idea what this place is like," he said cryptically, leaning back in his chair and looking at me with what was almost a challenge in his eyes. "Sometimes you've just got to throw all your fears aside and embrace the unknown. I'm sure it's the perfect place for us. You'll understand once you're there." I sighed, feeling a faint flicker of doubt ignited my chest. I looked at Matt. He was genuinely enthusiastic about the idea, and there was a spark in his eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. We had both been so absorbed in our routines, in our own worlds, that we barely noticed each other anymore. Maybe his proposal was indeed a chance to escape and start something new. "All right," I finally said, trying to hide the slight unease in my voice. "When are we leaving?" The next morning, as I was still trying to wrap my mind around the upcoming adventure, a loud knock echoed through the house. Opening the door, I found Jay standing there, Matt's younger nephew, with whom he had always shared a close bond. Jay was standing on the doorstep with a massive suitcase that seemed twice his own size. A peculiar skull and crossbone symbol stood out prominently on the suitcase's lid. I couldn't hold back a smile, though inside, a vague feeling of apprehension gripped me. "Hi, Sky. Uncle said you two might need some company to keep things interesting at the estate," he said with a slight smirk, stepping inside and placing his suitcase in the hallway. I looked at Matt in surprise, but he just shrugged and smiled as if everything was going according to plan. Jay not only seemed ready for anything, but immediately set to unpacking his things. Among his clothes and a couple of books, I noticed an odd collection, maps, ancient-looking tools, and most bizarrely an amulet on a leather cord, marked with a symbol that looked like a totem from an old movie about shamans and ancient spirits. "It's a protective amulet," Jay said with a mysterious smile, as if anticipating my question. He took the amulet off his neck and held it out to me, watching my reaction closely. "Protective?" I repeated with a slight smirk, holding the strange object in my hand. The metal was cold and felt unusually heavy for such a small charm. I wanted to hand it back, but then I caught Jay's gaze. He was looking at me with an intensity that suggested he truly believed the amulet could protect us from something unseen. A strange sense of excitement stirred within me, and unsure why, I nodded and carefully placed the amulet around my neck. "So, ready for the journey?" he asked, giving me a wink. We set off a little later than planned, and I tried to keep myself calm, though a growing unease crept over me as we ventured deeper into the forest. The road became narrower, and the tall trees with their dark, dense canopies seemed to close in around us, as if growing deliberately to enclose our path. Inside the car, a strange silence hung, broken only by Matt's occasional comments about the days ahead and the hum of the engine, muffled by the tightly intertwined branches overhead. Jay sat in the back seat, peering out the window with keen interest, studying the forest surrounding now. Catching my gaze in the rearview mirror, he smirked and said, "The locals say this place is cursed, right?" He drew out the word cursed, almost savoring, throwing it like a challenge and waiting for my reaction. Seriously, I laughed, but a shiver ran through me. With the thick shadows of the forest and the almost impenetrable branches, any mention of a curse seemed to settle into my mind, coloring everything around us. "Seriously?" Jay continued, leaning closer to me. "There are rumors that the previous owners disappeared one night, just vanished without a trace. No one ever found out what happened to them. They left the house behind, as if something had snatched them right out of their lives. Everything's still in place, only silence and empty rooms." I glanced at Matt, hoping to catch a flicker of doubt or some hint that he was aware of these rumors. But he just sighed, as if deciding to leave my fears to Jay's discretion. It seemed like Jay was just having fun, though I couldn't tell if he was joking or not. Do you always have such a knack for stirring up the mood, Jay? Or is it just your special talent when the night feels particularly ominous? I tried to joke, but my voice sounded more tense than I intended. An unsettling chill crept down my spine as Jay's mysterious smile lingered, only deepening the tension, as if something invisible was coiling around us in the air. We drove on, but my mind spiraled into questions I hadn't thought of before. Who was the mysterious woman in those photographs left behind in the house? And had it really been a good idea to come here at all? We arrived at the house at sunset, just as thick clouds began to knot the sky tightly, and darkness was already creeping through the trees. The estate, surrounded by a tall, rusty fence, rose from the ground like an old, forgotten nest, consumed by nature. It looked majestic yet menacing, a place that had long lost human presence and now lived a strange life of its own. Matt stopped the car, and in the ensuing silence we froze for a moment, gazing at the house with its dark windows like a monument to the past. Jay spoke first. Impressive, huh? He practically leapt out of the car, looking around with eager curiosity, as if the place was a massive treasure chest he'd been waiting to open. Ignoring my unease, he grabbed a flashlight and, without waiting for us, hurried toward the old door, which creaked loudly under his touch, as though protesting the intrusion of uninvited guests. Matt took my hand, gently squeezing my fingers as if to say everything was all right. I could feel his palm was slightly damp. Perhaps he was nervous, too, even though he tried not to show it. As I stepped onto the threshold, a sharp smell of dampness and dust hit me. Yet there was something more in the scent, a chilly trace of history, as if the old house's memories still lingered within its walls. Jay was already exploring the rooms. Soon, he called out to us, standing in the middle of the main hall, barely containing his excitement. The previous tenants left their things behind. Look, old documents, notes, and this. He pulled out what looked like a box stuffed with Latin-inscribed papers and yellowed photographs. One of the photos showed a woman with a heavy, contemplative gaze, as though she saw more than she could say. I couldn't tear my eyes away from her face, surrounded by shadows, as if each feature concealed its own secret. Do you think it's a mystery left by the former owners? I asked, involuntarily drawn into the atmosphere of the place. Jay looked at me with a faint smirk, wearing that expression he had when he was about to say something provocative. Maybe, he replied, holding my gaze. But I wouldn't be surprised if by morning this woman tells us her story herself. I frowned, trying to decipher whether he was joking or serious, but the mystery hung in the air, giving everything around us an unreal feeling. Jay chuckled slightly, and setting the box aside, turned on his flashlight, ready to continue his exploration. Matt and I remained in the hall, listening to the faint sounds of the house. The creaks, like footsteps, the whisper of window frames rattling in the wind. It was a strange sensation, as if the house itself was welcoming us, observing and studying us, holding its breath. Night fell quickly, and the old house plunged into a darkness as deep as a well. Matt, Jay, and I lit a fire in the fireplace, and soon the room filled with a soft, flickering glow that cast strange shadows on the walls, bringing the antique portraits and furniture to life, as though awakening the house from long-forgotten slumber. I tried to relax, enjoying the warmth and rare moments of silence, but it turned out Matt hadn't come here solely for a peaceful evening. Do you even understand why we're here? He suddenly blurted out, breaking the cozy atmosphere that had just begun to settle. There was a note of resentment in his voice. It sounded almost like an accusation. I turned to him, raising my eyebrows in surprise. Until that moment, I had thought he was enjoying the trip, that he was thrilled about this adventure, but it seemed something lay beneath his calm exterior. To be honest, not really, I replied, trying to keep my tone even. You suggested coming here without really explaining why, and now you expect me to be enthusiastic. Matt looked at me, and in his gaze I sensed disappointment, as if he'd hoped for more understanding or involvement from me. I thought you'd support this idea, Sky. There's so much history here, so many mysteries, but all I see from you is doubt and boredom. His words hit me hard. I looked at the fire, trying not to let my emotions overwhelm me. Jay, who had been quietly observing our exchange, suddenly raised his glass, clearly wanting to diffuse the tension and offer to toast, to mysteries and to those who seek them. His voice was unexpectedly cheerful, and despite the hurt inside, I couldn't help but smile. We lifted our glasses in silence, and in Jay's eyes I caught an unspoken message of support, as if he was saying, "You're not alone. Don't worry." But even after the toast, the tension between Matt and me lingered. I could feel the discord stretching between us like a crack, one that might one day become a chasm. The warmth of the fire filled the room, but deep within me, a cold sense of foreboding grew. A feeling that this trip would uncover something far more complex than just an old house and its secrets. In the dead of night, I woke up to a strange sound. It was a faint rustling, as if someone was cautiously walking down the hallway just beyond the wall. At first, I thought it was merely the wind sneaking through cracks in the old windows, but the sound was persistent and clear, like someone slowly moving through the house, checking each door and window, leaving a faint echo in their wake. I listened, feeling my heart pick up its pace, and quietly slipped out of bed, pulling on my robe. Stepping into the dark hallway, I noticed a dim light flickering in one corner. It was Jay, who, as it turned out, was also awake. He was sitting on the floor in a distant corner, his face illuminated by a strange old-fashioned lantern that he seemed to have found somewhere in the house. "What are you doing here?" I whispered, careful not to disturb the silence. Jay glanced at me, offering a mysterious smile, as if he'd been waiting for that very question. "Found something interesting," he said, raising the lantern, which glowed with an odd, almost surreal light. In his hands, it looked like something straight out of the past. Jay studied me intently, as though he were trying to read my thoughts. "They say this lantern can help you see what once was. It can show you the past of this house." I wasn't sure how to react, whether to laugh it off or feel unnerved. But my hand instinctively reached for the lantern, and Jay handed it to me, his fingers lingering on mine a bit longer than necessary. The lantern was cold, and a shiver ran through my fingers as I held it. I aimed it toward the wall, trying to make out something in its eerie light, when suddenly my gaze fell on an old mirror across from us. In the dim glow behind our reflection, I caught a faint, almost elusive image of a woman. She stood there as if she had always been there, watching us from within the glass, a figure draped in shadow. I held my breath, feeling a chill tighten around my chest. The woman in the mirror seemed almost alive, and her eyes held a sadness I couldn't explain. My heart skipped a beat, and I quickly set the lantern aside, as if that would break the strange vision. "Looks like someone decided to get a little closer to us," Jay muttered, attempting a faint smirk, though I could see the same unease in his eyes that I felt. He might have been joking, but there was a hint of truth in his words. This house was hiding something, and now I knew it for certain. The next day, I found myself with Jay again as he quietly descended into the basement to continue studying the old documents and maps we had uncovered the night before. I followed him, sensing that an invisible bond had formed between us since last night. Down below, beneath the house, the air was cold, thick with dampness, and a hint of something inexplicably dark. The old walls and ceiling beams felt alive, as if they were observing our every. Jay sat on the floor, surrounded by worn maps and papers, with a faint smile that showed how much he was enjoying all of this. "I can't believe you're seriously going through all this," I said, sitting down beside him. "Old papers, maps, amulets. Are you really that interested in all of this?" He looked at me, squinting slightly, as though carefully considering his response. "You see, Sky, these aren't just old things. They're traces of someone's life. A story that someone once lived. There's something important here, something these walls were meant to preserve, though it might have been lost over time. I've always been curious to understand how people lived before us, how they thought, what they left behind. I could understand his interest to a high degree, but to me, this fascination with the dusty past was incomprehensible. How could anyone delve so deeply into it instead of living in the present? His expression, however, suddenly became serious, and as if sensing my doubts, he added, "You know, I've always felt like an outsider in the ordinary world. People get used to their routines, and that's enough for them. But I've always looked for something more. There's a truth in these things, a truth about life, about the light, meaning behind everything around us. But you have to know how to see it, how to feel it. His words unexpectedly resonated with me. We sat on the cold basement floor, surrounded by shadows and dust from the past. But at that moment, I felt understood, more than by anyone else, perhaps even more than by Matt. Jay's words made me look inward, at my own fears and doubts. We talked for a long time, discussing the oddities of the world and our own ideas about what it meant to truly live in the present. When he suggested we explore the old underground passageways, which he claimed had been built to allow the house's residents to escape in times of danger, I agreed, though I felt a slight unease. He offered me his hand to help me up, and I noticed how his fingers gripped mine just a bit tighter than necessary. There was something reassuring in his touch, as if he were silently telling me that with him, I could feel safe. We walked through the dark corridors, lighting our way with a small flashlight we'd brought from the basement. Around us, there was a dead silence, broken only by our footsteps and the faint rustling of time trapped within these walls. Cobwebs clung to our hands and old boards creaked underfoot. But with Job beside me, I suddenly stopped noticing the darkness. Our conversation drifted to deeper topics, things I hadn't discussed with anyone in a long time. At one point, I asked, "Why do you really like these mysteries, Jay? You could just live peacefully, like everyone else." Not fully understanding why I'd asked, as if I were hoping to hear something that might help me understand my own choices. He paused for a moment, looking at me in the dim light, then shrugged slightly. To be honest, at Sky, an ordinary life scares me. People are afraid to step outside their limits, trapping themselves in trivial routines. I don't want to wake up one day and realize I never did anything meaningful. But here, in these strange places, at least I feel like I'm truly alive. His admission struck something deep within me, and I felt a spark ignite in my heart. In this underground maze, we were alone, with our thoughts and questions. I looked at him in the darkness and realized that Jay not only understood me better than I thought, but that he was somehow awakening something new within me as well. We continued down the narrow tunnel, and with each step, I felt as though the walls were closing in, the air growing heavier, and the surrounding darkness seeping into us. It seemed like the path stretched endlessly deeper into the shadows, stirring a quiet anxiety that we might get lost in this. I stayed close to Jay, following his steady steps, and I found myself struck by his calm, focused demeanor. It was as though the darkness didn't frighten him at all. But then, as we turned a corner, the floor suddenly sloped downwards. My foot slipped on the damp stone, and before I could catch myself, I felt a strong hand grab me, stopping my fall. We froze, and I realized Jay's fingers were gripping mine tightly. We stood there in the darkness, far too close to each other, as if time had come to a halt. I looked up, meeting his eyes, bright and intense, catching the light from the flashlight in a way that made them seem especially vivid. My heart began to beat faster, and I realized that I hadn't felt this kind of thrill in a long time. Jay didn't let go of my hand. His grip tightened slightly, and in his gaze I sensed something more than simple concern. "I think I'd better keep a closer watch on you in these dark corridors," he murmured at last with a faint smile, though his voice was barely audible, as if he himself didn't want to break the moment that had formed between us. His eyes lingered on me, studying me as though he were trying to understand if I felt the same as he did. I couldn't help but smile, feeling his hands slowly release mine. We continued walking, but that moment stayed with me, etched deeper than I could have anticipated. That evening, I realized that something had awakened between us, something that didn't quite fit within the boundaries of our previous relationship. Morning brought with it a thick fog that cloaked the estate, like a veil cutting us off from the rest of the world. Matt had gone into the nearby town to get supplies, leaving Jay and me alone. I couldn't help noticing how Matt had been growing increasingly distant, his glances tense and withdrawn. But Jay didn't let me dwell on thoughts of Matt for long. As soon as he left, Jay pulled me along for another exploration of the house. We decided to check the rooms we hadn't had a chance to explore yesterday, and soon we discovered an old, hidden compartment in the wall. Looks like the former residents enjoyed puzzles as much as I do. Jay said, as I leaned in beside him to examine the inscription, "Maybe there's something important about the owners of the house hidden here." Jay suggested, his eyes gleaming with excitement. His enthusiasm was infectious, and to be honest, it was starting to rub off on me. For the first time in a long while, I found myself genuinely interested in being a part of this search, momentarily forgetting everything else. The note seemed like our key to unraveling the mysteries of this house, maybe even understanding its history. As we pored over the Latin lines, Jay leaned closer, whispering possible interpretations. He threw out different guesses, and at one point we both burst into laughter when one of the symbols looked oddly like a caricature. Standing together in this dark, dusty room, I realized how easy and lighthearted it felt to be with him. When we finally managed to decipher part of the riddle, Jay reached out, his hand brushing mine, as if by accident. He looked at me, smiling, and quietly said, "You know, Sky, maybe this isn't all just a coincidence. Maybe we were meant to be here to uncover something important about this house and maybe even about ourselves." I met his gaze, and in his eyes I saw a warm confidence that made me feel steady and calm. I wanted to tell him that I felt it too. Late that evening, we found ourselves alone again, sitting by the fire burning in the courtyard of the estate. The flames crackled, casting a soft glow over our faces and throwing long shadows on the stone walls. The air was cold, and I wrapped myself in a blanket to keep warm, though I barely felt the chill. My attention was entirely on Jay, who sat across from me. We talked about what we had discovered about the house, shared our thoughts on the strange findings, and discussed our ideas like inseparable companions who had found something vital in each other. A silence settled over us, lingering. Jay looked up at me, and in that moment I saw something in his gaze that sent my heart racing. Slowly he leaned toward me. My heart paused, as if sensing that something inevitable and significant was about to happen. And then his lips met mine. I closed my eyes, letting myself dissolve into this feeling, into this warmth. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a confession, an unspoken understanding we had been searching for, not only in the old records, but also in ourselves. When the kiss ended, he pulled back slightly, looking into my eyes as if seeking to understand what I felt, as if it mattered more to him than ever. "You feel it too, don't you?" he whispered, his voice low and a little unsteady, as if he were afraid to break the spell of the moment. Sitting beside him, I realized that this feeling wasn't just a fleeting infatuation. It was real and unfeigned, like the light from the flames that warmed us that evening. As the first pale streaks of dawn began to break through the dark clouds, I lay in bed, still shaken by the events of the past night. The images wouldn't leave me. The fire, Jay's warm gaze. It wasn't just a fleeting sensation, but something profound, new, and frighteningly real. I was trying to make sense of my feelings when suddenly I heard heavy footsteps outside the door. They drew closer, and for a moment I thought it might be Jay, coming to talk about what had happened. But when the door opened, it was Matt standing there. His face was pale and tense, his gaze cold and piercing. He looked at me as if he were seeing something distasteful, something unacceptable. I sat up, startled by his presence, unable to even form a question before he spoke. "I came back earlier than you expected," he said slowly, struggling to contain his emotions, though his voice already betrayed the pain he was trying to hide. And I saw more than I wanted to. I felt my cheeks flush and my heart race. Everything became clear in an instant. He had returned during the night and found Jay and me together. In that moment, I realized there was no point in hiding my feelings or trying to convince myself that nothing had happened. The thought that I'd hurt him pained me, but looking into Matt's eyes, I understood that there had been a smoldering distance between us for a long time. This hadn't started here, in this estate. Our feelings had begun to fade much earlier, but only now, away from our usual surroundings, had it all become undeniable. Matt, I tried to say something, but the words caught in my throat. He cut me off, not giving me a chance to explain. "Don't, Sky, I understand everything. I should have understood this a long time ago. This house, this place, it helped me see the truth. Something broke between us long ago, and you know that as well as I do." His voice was quiet, but resolute. He turned away, as if he didn't want to look at me or hear any response. For a moment, I felt a strange mixture of relief and guilt, yet mingled within that confusing cocktail of emotions was also a sense of clarity that perhaps we both had been waiting for this moment. Matt cast one last look at me, filled with sadness and a strange calm, as if he were accepting the inevitable. "Stay here as long as you like," he said, standing by the doorway. "But don't expect me to come back." And with that, he left, leaving me alone with an endless stream of thoughts. It had all happened so quickly, yet I felt that this ending wasn't an accident. It was as if some unseen mechanism, set in motion by us long ago, had led us to this point, where each of us had to choose our own path. After Matt's departure, a profound silence wrapped around the house, growing almost unbearable. Being left alone with my thoughts proved harder than I'd expected. Guilt blended with an unexpected sense of relief, and this mix of emotions tore at me as I wandered through the empty corridors. I realized that last night had changed everything, and now each step, each decision was woven into a new, unknown future. Jay, noticing my state, approached me at the end of a long corridor where the old wooden panels and dim light gave the house an even more mysterious feel. He gently touched my hand, looking at me with a mixture of concern and compassion. More than anyone, he understood what I was going through, and he didn't need to say anything to let me know he was there for me. "Are you okay?" he finally asked, his voice soft but steady, as if he was ready to help me face whatever came next. I sighed, replying, "I think so, but at the same time, I don't know what to do now. It's like I'm living someone else's life." The realization filled me with both fear and sadness, but at the same time, I felt that I was standing on the threshold of something genuine. "Sky, you're not alone," Jay said quietly, and there was a warmth in his voice that reassured me even amidst the ruins of my former relationship. Sometimes things happen as they're meant to, and maybe there's something ahead for you that's greater than you can imagine. His words filled me with a sense of a new beginning, and as if sensing this, Jay added, "I found an old map of the coastline. I think we can find a trail out of the forest. If we leave at dawn, there's a village nearby." I nodded, and that decision marked a turning point. We decided that the next day we would set out, leaving behind this house with its secrets and sorrows to seek a fresh start. Preparing took little time, a few things we might need, and the map, which Jay folded carefully, as if it symbolized the journey we were about to share. In the morning, we left the house, glancing back only once to imprint the silhouette of the estate framed in the morning light. With each step down the forest path, pushing through the dense greenery, I felt more and more that I was finally moving towards something real. The forest proved to be denser and more challenging than we had anticipated. The trail we'd hoped to follow soon disappeared under tangled roots and thorny underbrush, and we were left to navigate blindly, doing our best to keep heading east toward the coast. With each step we ventured deeper, enveloped by a thick canopy that led in only faint slivers of morning light. The weight of the unknown pressed on us, but with Jay beside me, I felt a surprising calm. We exchanged only a few words, conserving our energy, yet our glances conveyed more than words ever could. Soon we emerged at the edge of a river with fast, churning waters. The banks were steep and slippery, and the water, dark and swift, seemed determined to sweep away anything in its path. I stopped, staring at the rushing flow, a chill of apprehension running through me at the thought of crossing. "Do you think we should turn back and look for a way around?" I asked, though I knew that might only lead us deeper into the unknown and even more lost. Jay shook his head, surveying the riverbanks with the same focused determination he'd shown in solving all our recent problems. After a moment, his face lit up with an idea. "We need a raft," he said, pointing to several logs partially washed ashore. "If we lash them together with some ropes I have, we should be able to get across." His resolve was contagious, and soon we were hard at work. Jay tied the logs together with sturdy knots, and after a few minutes we had a makeshift raft. We dragged it to the water's edge, and with a deep breath I climbed onto it, feeling the cold river water lick at my feet. Jay stood behind me, and as he pushed us off with a sturdy stick, we started moving across the strong current. The river roared beneath us, the raft creaking, but Jay held it steady, guiding us toward the opposite bank. Suddenly I felt his hand cover mine, a gesture that filled me with a steadying reassurance. In that moment I felt completely safe, despite the rushing water and our fragile craft. He looked at me, his eyes warm and confident, and I couldn't help but smile, realizing that with him by my side I had no fear. At last, we reached the other side, and as I stepped onto solid ground, I felt my legs trembling from exhaustion, yet a broad smile spread across my face. Jay laughed, watching me, and wrapping his arms around me, he said softly, "With you, I'm ready to go anywhere. Through this forest, or across the ocean." We stood together on the riverbank, drenched and tired, but filled with the resolve to keep moving forward. This journey was more than just a path through the forest. It was a test we had faced together, and it had only strengthened the bond that had formed between us. When we finally emerged from the forest and saw the small coastal town spread out before us, I felt an inexplicable lightness. The green hills, silver rooftops of distant houses, and the bright lines on the horizon, where the sky met the sea, created a sense of calm and new beginnings. This town felt like a place where life flowed peacefully, with no room for pain or regret. Ahead of us lay something different, something untainted by the past. Jay and I walked down the main street, each lost in our thoughts. In every look we exchanged, there was a quiet understanding and a deep sense of certainty. We both knew our lives were now divided into before and after this journey. The past was far behind, somewhere in the winding halls of the estate, in the darkness of nights, filled with mysteries we had unraveled together. Now before us lay a new clear path. After a few days in a small inn on the outskirts, we found a cozy cottage with a view of the sea, a place where we could breathe freely, gaze at the horizon, and reflect on how life sometimes leads us to strange places to show us who we really are. Jay quickly set up a workspace, a small studio where he could work as a diving instructor, living near the ocean he loved. I found a job in the local archive, exploring old books and uncovering secrets of the past, but now with a sense of joy and curiosity, not fear. Our new life was simple and serene. We spent evenings by the fireplace, either talking or sitting in silence, feeling that we didn't need words to understand each other. Sometimes I caught myself thinking that meeting him in that haunted house in those eerie shadows had brought me something precious, something that now shone like a beacon on the horizon. Several months had passed since we began our new life. Our cozy seaside cottage had become a place where I felt free, calm, and finally genuinely happy. Each day brought small joys in, a sense that everything we had been through had been worth it. Jay quickly settled into his new role. Working as a diving instructor, his eyes would light up every time he spoke of the ocean's depths, its mysteries, and its beauty. His face glowed with happiness each time he returned from a dive, and I knew he had found the fullness of life he had always sought beside the sea. My job at the archive filled me with a sense of purpose that once seemed unreachable. I dived eagerly into old documents, uncovering stories buried in the past, now free of fear, only with respect and curiosity for the memories they held. There was a purpose to it, and I felt I had found my path. In the evenings, Jay and I would return home, savoring life's simple pleasures, evening walks along the shore, the sound of the waves, the warmth of each other's presence. The house filled with the scent of herbal tea, candles, and the ocean air, a fragrance that was the essence of our new beginning, free from all the ghosts of the past. One warm evening, as we sat by the shore, Jay grew quiet and took my hand. We watched the sunset, and gazing out at the horizon, he spoke softly. "You know, Sky, I don't think we ended up here by accident. Everything that happened, every step, every trial led us to this moment. Here, on this shore, the past has finally let us go." Tears of gratitude filled my eyes as I looked at him, and in that moment, there wasn't a trace of doubt or regret left in my heart. This journey had brought us here, where we had found ourselves and each other. One day, after an especially warm and bright day, I returned home a bit earlier than usual. Jay was still out on his dive, and with the house to myself, I decided to sort through some old papers that had been left untouched since the day we left the estate. Among them was that same map of the coastline and the old note with barely visible symbols that we'd once found in the small, hidden compartment. I unfolded it, and a wave of memories washed over me. The house, the mystical glow of the lantern, the cold nights, and our first kiss that had marked the start of our new path. In the dim light, I looked closely at the symbols on the note, and suddenly one of them, which had always seemed puzzling, appeared clearer to me, as if the riddle had finally revealed itself. It was a sign reminiscent of a protective talisman, a symbol of guidance and a path illuminated by light. I smiled, feeling that strange connection between past and present come alive in my hands. Just then, the door opened quietly, and Jay entered, his hair still damp from the sea, his face weathered and smiling. Noticing me with the old note, he raised his eyebrows with no curiosity and stepped closer, looking over my shoulder. His hand rested gently on my shoulder, and familiar warmth filled the room once again. "Find something interesting?" he asked with a soft smile. "I'm not sure," I replied, shrugging, and handed him the note. "Sometimes I think this path was mapped out for us, as if the house itself led us through all those mysteries to bring us here." Jay looked at me, and in his gaze I saw the same certainty that had supported me through the entire journey. He took my hand, kissed it, and whispered, "It doesn't matter where we started or what mysteries we had to solve. What matters is what we've found here and now, and I promise you, this is just the beginning of our journey."